champions. I'm Amy Morgan, the feature writer for the San Antonio Marriage Initiative. I am so happy today to introduce you to author and ministry leader Cindy Beall. Cindy is the author of Healing Your Marriage When Trust is Broken and Rebuilding a Marriage Better Than New. Her books chronicle the journey of God's ability to restore her marriage better than new after a significant betrayal. Cindy, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me, Amy. I appreciate it.
There's so many people who are going to be able to benefit from your story, and it's great redemptive ending, or it's not ended. Obviously, you're sitting here with us, but
Sure. Yeah.
a redemptive journey. So, would you mind just kind of starting out where you start and let us know, what happened and what was going on?
Yeah, for sure. So it was January, or actually February of 2002, and we had just moved to Oklahoma to start a new ministry role at Life Church under the leadership of Craig and Amy Groeschel. And it was a Tuesday morning, and my husband came home from the office. He'd literally been working at Life Church for like 6 weeks, and he came home and he said, "Hey, we need to talk." And he proceeded to just tell me everything that had been going on in our marriage for about a 2.5 year period. He said he'd been unfaithful to me many times, many different places with many different women, and he just told me everything. He said everything to me that no spouse would ever want to hear. And so in that moment, my world just crumbled. And I thought, where do we even go from here? And so it was a pretty raw. I mean, I can look back because, it's been 20 years. I can look back, and in some ways, it seems like it was yesterday. And in other ways, it feels like it didn't even happen to me because of how God has redeemed us. So that's my story in a very short, small nutshell.
That was a very Reader's Digest version,
Yep,
and
yep, yep.
well, and I know there were some things particularly about it that first of all, you were in ministry. So
Yes.
that was, a magnifying glass on you and your family and you also had a pretty young son, right? It was just kind of you and you were home pretty much with a little one. So that could have magnified your feelings as well.
Yeah. My oldest son, who is now a father, and I have a granddaughter from him, he was only 3. And so it was just this feeling of like, am I going to be a single mother? What do I do now? Because, it might be different. It might have been different if we didn't have children. I don't really know, but it feels like it could have been. It could have been easier to walk away. But I have this child who adores his father, but, it just, there were so many moving parts and so many pieces to the story that were heartbreaking and devastating. But in time, I just truly began to seek God and ask Him, okay, so what am I supposed to do with this?
Well, and I do want to talk about that. There was something though that led your husband, and I think it's important that people understand. I know in your book you talk about some dangers, but there was a danger point that led your husband to take a turn in the wrong direction. And I think maybe we should address that quickly, just kind of to fill in your story, and then we can talk about
Yeah.
how all the amazing things God did to help.
Yes, and there's so many pieces. Sometimes I don't always say the right things. I'm like, "Oh yeah, that's a pretty important part." So, a lot of times with marital unfaithfulness, you might have an inappropriate friendship that goes too far, or an office romance, or just, something like that where there's lines crossed. The lines that my husband crossed had to do with an addiction to pornography. So he was introduced to pornography at age 8. He found a magazine. I shouldn't say he was introduced. He found a magazine. It wasn't, I'm not trying to say it wasn't his fault, but he found this and, young. And then that just kind of began this little, I guess it was a little problem back before the internet. And then when the internet came, it was like gas on a fire, and it just continued to envelop him, really. And he began to, what once appealed to him in images on a screen no longer appealed to him. And then he would seek out chat rooms, and that eventually that no longer appealed to him. And then he would go literally to a club or a bar. And so just the the trajectory of what sinful behavior does in our lives, and that's what happened with him. And so he just got to the point that day when he confessed to me that he no longer wanted to live in that prison that he had been living in because he was 30, I think 29, 30. And so he, for, however long, at least for as long as the internet had been going on, so like a good several years. And he just thought, I can't live like this. I need to find freedom.
Well, and I think it's really important, especially since we're talking to our marriage champions here. Addiction to pornography, it's kind of like it's a hidden sin. It's kind of like in the Christian world too. What, everyone eats cake, right? And maybe there
Yes.
can be a
Yes.
gluttony problem as well. But I mean, that's something people can look so shiny and spruced up and sitting in your pews, and yet it's so easy because of the internet that it hides. And yet, and people should, and this is one way too to shine a light on it, take away the shame, and point people to help, because I bet every one of our marriage champions knows somebody that's struggling with this exact situation.
Yeah, and I would even say, when everything happened with us in 2002, that was before social media, that was before smartphones, and so everything was truly on a computer, like,
Yeah.
typically, we just didn't carry things around in our pocket like we do now. We had phones, but they were flip phones, and it just was different. But now, like, you don't even have to open up your laptop. You can basically see very soft kind of pornography in social media. I mean, you turn on certain videos or on YouTube, I mean, like, you can see a whole lot, and your imagination can fill in the blanks, and you never actually even went to a porn site.
Yeah.
So that there's a lot of dangers out there, and I think that your marriage champions, those watching, I know that they see those dangers as well, and I'm sure they have a lot of different tactics that they use to help couples find freedom there.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that we discussed that really struck me, you said, because again, it was like a blind side. Here you were in a brand new church in a brand new state. You didn't know anybody. And you said that the church where you were, Life Church, was
Mhm.
so filled with people with integrity
Yeah.
that your husband, how did you phrase that again? I just thought that was so
Yeah, yeah.
telling.
I said that he was at work, for a good 6 weeks before his confession, and he felt like there was spiritual sandpaper on his soul. Like, every day he went to work, and he was so uncomfortable around these people who were living lives of integrity and who were men and women of character, and they were challenging each other, and he just wasn't used to that environment at all.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to make sure that we mentioned that, because I just thought that was so significant, because again, that those are the people our marriage champions are, and that's a role
Yeah,
that they can be. They can be that spiritual sandpaper by their integrity. Um,
yeah.
I wanted to encourage them. So then, what did your church do? How did a lot of churches would have said, "Okay, bye, woof, off you go."
Right. Yeah. You're out of here. You take care of yourself. God bless you. Our church did not do that. And honestly, they could have, because we had, like I said, we'd only been there 6 weeks, and it wasn't, Life Church now is a very large, internet or national church, in many states. But back then we were just in Oklahoma City, in Edmond, Oklahoma. So it wasn't that we weren't popular and well known or anything. And so I remember, um, he confessed to me on a Tuesday, and our pastor, Craig, and another one of our leaders, Jerry, they came over to the house that day, actually probably within the hour. And we just kind of all sat across from each other and just kind of stared at each other like, so what do we do now? And obviously we knew that Chris was not going to continue his job. We understood that. That part was understandable. But, like, what do you do going forward? And so our leadership team got together and basically said, you know what? We will help you. We will be a hospital where you can heal. But I did appreciate that they gave parameters. They said, we'll help you, but these are the things we expect, meaning, like, Chris had to go obviously find another job. And so they didn't want him to find a job where he could travel. and be alone in a hotel. And so
Yeah.
they said, "Hey, you need to be wise with the things you do." And so we followed all the different parameters. We found a mentor couple. Actually, they kind of found the couple for us, which was a godsend. I write about them in my book. But the thing that was really powerful is that Craig actually preached about us like 5 days later on Sunday morning at church, and he told our people the truth. He didn't go into too much detail because you don't need to
No.
imagine things. You just need to know there's a moral failure. Chris was unfaithful, but they're going to make it work, kind of thing. And so, what was amazing is the people just loved us. And the very next Sunday, we came to church. And I remember that day, it was so hard walking into that building where 2 weeks before we were on the stage leading worship, and we came in and we were petrified. I don't know what we were petrified with, but we were just scared. And I guess the unknown. And we sat down and we cried all the way. I mean, you just cried all the way through the service. And when Craig got up on the stage and started to share, he said, last week um, we had some heavy news, and he said, but Chris and Cindy are here today and they're sitting right over there. And everybody just stood up and they
Oh,
clapped. And I mean, I usually can't say this part of it without crying, but I'm trying to hold my tears in. But it was like it was just the way the church should be. We should be for people who think they have it together and for the people who don't have it together. We should be the people who love people where they are. Because even the people who look like they have it all together, there's something that they probably don't have together, and they need the grace of Jesus too. So, anyway, it was a very profound moment for us to see the church stand with us. And every week we came back and we started serving, and um, you know, we were there, and people were praying for us, and it was just I mean, a miracle, really.
so how did God begin to turn some things around? Because you said, you weren't sure. Do I stay? Do I go? I mean, you had biblical grounds for divorce, but yet you didn't feel like that's where God was leading you. How did you determine that?
Yeah, that's a good question because a lot of people that I've talked with over the last 2 decades is they usually ask me that question, "Cindy, should I stay or should I go?" They kinda want me to give them an answer, and I
Yeah.
understand. That's a very serious decision to make.
Mhm.
Um, so part of it was that I'm watching my husband, who is completely broken and repentant. He
Yes.
is owning his sin. He knows what he has done. He is making amends. He is apologizing to the right people. I mean, he's calling our family. He is doing everything you would want to see in someone as they repent, right?
Mhm.
And so I'm watching this and I'm thinking, okay, God, so what should I do? And that, like I said at the beginning, I started asking God, show me what to do. And so he used a very godly man in my life who was actually my mom's pastor down in Georgetown, Texas, because I'm from Texas. And so I went back down to visit my mom. And so I met with her pastor, and he was just so kind and loving. And he said this phrase to me, and he said, Cindy, you are not a fool to stay and be a part of the redemptive work in a man's life. And
Will you
I
say
don't
that
know
again?
about you. Yeah, I
Will
don't
you
know
say
about
that
you,
again
but,
so
like,
everybody really catches that? Because that's
yeah,
profound.
yeah, and I mean, I'll never he said it one time, and I can't forget it. Like, I it's ingrained in me, and he said, "You are not a fool to stay and be a part of the redemptive work in a man's life." And that was the beginning of me thinking, "Okay, okay." So, fast forward, couple days later, maybe a few days later, I actually came on down to San Antonio where you guys are, and my best friend lived down there, and I went to her church, and I kinda thought her pastor I really respected her pastor, and I thought, "Surely he's gonna be the one who kinda shares something with me." It was a smaller church, so you kinda all knew everybody, but he wasn't there that day, and at the end of the service, this girl stood up, and let me backtrack a second. I had been praying, God, I need a word from your word. Like I need to
Mhm.
stand on something from the word of God.
Yeah.
Advice from people is great, well-meaning, godly people, great, but I need to stand on something so that when the waves come in and crash against me in the coming weeks and months and years, I'm standing on something. And so we're in this service, and this girl stands up. She's young, probably 18. And she said, I'm supposed to share this verse with someone today. And she stood up and she read Habakkuk 2:3. And basically it says, for the vision is yet for the appointed time, though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay. And as she said that, I started crying. And I was like, what is happening? And I just almost felt like the Holy Spirit was kind of behind me, pointing forward, saying, I know you don't understand, but I need you to trust me. I
Yeah.
have I just need you to trust me. So last part of this story that's really the clincher is um, like 2 hours later, we went to see one of my friend's friends who I didn't really know. And she just kind of looked at me and she was like, what's going on in your life? I told her, she goes, hey, I want to share something with you. She brings her Bible. She says, I was reading in Habakkuk 2:3 this morning. And she reads the exact
Wow.
same verse. Yeah, same day.
Here's your verse for you.
Yeah, same verse, two different women who didn't know each other, and so I at that moment I thought, okay, I know what God's calling me to do, and I just felt I just kept hearing from God like, do you trust me? Do you trust me? And I said, okay, God, I trust you. And as I said that, I just felt, that peace that passes understanding, the kind that, we know when we have it, we know when we don't, and we can't explain it, we can't understand it, we don't know where it came from, except for Him.
Yeah.
That came upon me, and we began the journey of healing after that. So it took some time for me to really say, yeah, I'm going to stay married. Um, I mean, I say time, it was a few weeks, but those 3 weeks in limbo felt like a lifetime. So yeah, that's kind of, I mean, that's really what God did and how He showed me what He was calling me to do in our marriage.
Well, and I remember you said too, there was another pastor, I think, that said you don't have to make your life's decision
Yes.
right now.
Yeah,
Just,
and he said that, so backtrack to that first week, after Chris told me, and, I'm in a panic. What do I do? I'm trying to decide all these things, and he just looked at me calmly, and he said, "Cindy, you don't have to decide the rest of your life today." And there was just a settledness that came upon me that was like, "You're right, I really don't. I don't have to figure out 10 years from now, tomorrow. I really don't. What are the things I need to think about today?" And so that really brought freedom and peace to me, just with that simple statement.
and these are all statements that our marriage champions can be the ones that can take this page and say some of these wise
Mhm.
things to the
Yeah.
people that they. And now let's go back to, you said you had this mentor couple, because again, here are
Mhm.
marriage champions, you guys are
Yep.
our mentor couples. Tell me
Yep.
what they did that helped you. These are the things you've written in your books, of course, but
Yeah.
tell me the things they did that really helped you do the work of, once you've made a decision now to stay, but you can't just say, okay, you
Yeah.
was heavy lifting to be done.
Yeah, and I would say the biggest thing they did was they brought us into their family. They had older kids, like in their young 20s, so it wasn't like they had little kids. Um, and so they brought us in. They came over and spent time with us. We went places with them. We just started doing life together. In the early weeks, we were with them every single day. Like they would either come over every day or we would go to their house. And then as time went on, it was a little bit more farther and farther apart. But I would say to your couples who are listening, like, if you have the ability, if you have the freedom in your schedule to just be with some of these couples, whether you invite them over for dinner and just love on them, like that was the most valuable thing. They were wise, like, their names are Jim and Beth, and they were as wise as they come. I mean, like, just to sit with them and be with them and listen to them and talk to them about Jesus, like, it was just amazing. But I'm telling you, just that it that's what I know people need is just to be with like-minded believers in Jesus who are just going to be with them. Because sometimes when you're alone or it's just the married couple who's struggling and that your mind just starts thinking and going down paths and you're like, "Oh, I need to change who I'm around or what I'm listening to or what I'm hearing." So, and I would also say to your couples who, you know, they're pouring into marriages or maybe these couples have not experienced any kind of deep betrayal like that. We've all let each other down. Let's face it. We've all disappointed each other, we've hurt each other. But even if you haven't been through some kind of betrayal like I have, it doesn't disqualify you from still pouring into people. People just need to be heard and they need to not be rushed through their grief. That would be the biggest thing I would tell you because typically people who don't like to see discomfort, um, they don't want you to grieve through your pain and loss. And I don't think your couples are necessarily, I'm not saying that's the marriage couples, but like typically just outside like that is so real. And oh, well, come on, let's do this and get your mind off of it. Man, sometimes you just need to push through the grief, pray through it, and then figure out other healthy tactics to help you grow and grieve through your pain.
Well, I know, fast forward, you guys are back in ministry at Life Church, and that's one of the things you
Yeah,
guys do is you counsel all these. So you're speaking as a marriage champion now, and you put that wisdom in your book, which you've revised for the 20-year,
yeah,
redemptive anniversary. Let's talk about a little bit about this content because you're talking from both sides, both as the person that was the mentee and the mentor. So
right.
yeah, let's talk about your books.
Yeah, so I wrote the book Healing Your Marriage When Trust Is Broken was first released in 2011. So we had been walking out our journey for about 10 years ish, little maybe just a little less. And then 5 years after that, I wrote Rebuilding a Marriage Better Than New. And the first book is pretty easy to understand. I wrote about my story because there's so many people who have that story, and there wasn't a ton of resources. So I wanted to provide that for help. The second book, Rebuilding a Marriage Better Than New, I actually wrote as like it's less about like if you take both of my books, the first one's more like we're in the emergency room, we got to stop the bleeding. Here's a resource. The second one is more like, okay, you've been in therapy, you're at a hospital, you're rehabbing. And because I found a lot of these couples would come back to me and say, "Hey, we've been on this journey for a couple of years, and I don't know if is this still related to what happened or what's going on?" And really, I tried to help people understand that some of the struggles you're going through are just because you're married, not
Yeah.
because your husband or wife was unfaithful or betrayed you in some significant way. You're just married, and marriage is hard because you're dying to yourself and you've got to eventually become a union and not just two people together. So yeah, that was the premise behind both of the books. And so my first book that's re-released for the 20 year, I wanted to continue to give people the hope of God still working even in our marriage. Now, Chris and I mean, we have really healed well. God has done remarkable work in both of us individually and then also as a couple. We are best friends. We have the best time together. We adore each other. We just celebrated 29 years of marriage. So we are good and solid and strong because we have healed well. And I want people to know that it is still possible. And so, one of my favorite things about the re-release is at the very end, I added a final chapter, and it's like 20 insights in these last 20 years. And so I just kind of gave a bunch of things that we've worked through and the things that we've incorporated into our marriage. And hopefully, and honestly, those 20 things can help any couple, regardless of what you've been through in your marriage. So that's the backstory behind those books.
Well, don't keep us in the dark. Give us some of those 20 things.
Gosh, of course you're going to ask me. I don't have my book right in front of me. But I talk a lot about I think one of the biggest things that I try to tell couples is when there's conflict, because there will be, you are two people who have two ideas about things, you're going to have conflict. It just is going to happen. You're going to see things differently. So try to figure out if that conflict is coming from something that's between you as a couple, or if it's something that's upon you. So let's say you're in a season and you've had a death in the family, somebody's parents died, something's going on with one of your kids, your jobs are crazy. I would consider that stuff that is upon you and it just kind of pushes in on your marriage, and that just happens, right? But then there's other times where one of you is being disrespectful to the other, one of you is not honoring the other. And so those are things between you. So recognizing where the stress and the pain and all of the things are coming from kind of helps you navigate. So it my husband and I have been through many seasons with older
Right.
parents and with teenagers and with grown adult children, and we are very like, okay, he just snapped at me, but his job is really stressful right now. It's not me. He's not mad at me. I just happen to be right there. That's probably one of the most beneficial things that we try to tell couples is figure out where that conflict is coming from. Another point that I made in that chapter was to aim for unity. And if there's not unity, um, figure out, does this really matter? So if you're both trying to decide which light fixture you want in the dining room, and let's just say the husband could care less, then you probably don't need unity. The husband may say, babe, just get whatever you want, right?
Like it's yes.
But yeah, yeah, I don't care about your light fixture. But there's other things like, what are we going to do with this particular amount of money, or how are we going to navigate our children in this situation? Those are things you need some unity on. And Chris and I always say that until we're unified, we don't move forward. We stay in a holding pattern. And a lot of times this can take place in like thinking about people's finances. So like if you're not in agreement, sometimes there's usually a spender and a saver in the marriage. There just usually is. So until you're unified on what to do, then I would just say that just to hold and then get to a place where you can work through and figure out what that looks like. So those are just a couple of things that I wrote about.
Yeah. Going back, I think you said something about deciding not to hold it against them forever,
Yeah.
holding the sin against the offender forever. At some point, you have to, you talked about some forgiveness.
Yeah, and you really do. And Lisa Turker speaks to this beautifully in her book. I think it's "Forgiving What You Can't Forget." Maybe it's her book on forgiveness. It's profound, and she's an excellent writer. And she's been through quite a lot of stuff in her own personal marriage. But she said something about forgiving the act, or forgiving the situation or the wound or whatever it is that you have to forgive. That's not always the hard part. It's figuring out what to do with those feelings that come up when you're reminded of that thing that happened. So, forgiving Chris for being unfaithful was actually not the hardest thing for me, because I know he wasn't trying to make my life miserable. He wasn't trying to hurt me. He felt that. I mean, we've talked through all of these things over the years. And of course, he never wanted that. But unfortunately, his life was out of control and he was choosing to gratify his flesh through pornography. And so it did hurt me. And so one of the things that we've talked through is, um, you know, what do I do with those memories when they surface? And
Yeah.
so that's the part that's hard. I just choose to relinquish that and recognize that I have forgiven him. So anyway,
Well, and I believe that would be a hard thing, but that's something that's necessary to move forward, right? Because you can't keep
yeah,
throwing somebody's, fault
you can't.
in their
You
face.
can't.
Well,
Yeah.
there's no way to move forward. So
Yeah.
anyway, oh, Cindy, thank you so much. You have been
Thank
such
you
so
so
delightful
much.
to talk to. I know you're going to be just a wealth of resources for our marriage champions and marriage champions.
Awesome.
As always, if you're looking to connect with Cindy, you can always find out more at samarriage.org.